Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the House Discrimination Prevention Panel meeting on the morning of Friday, April 1st. I get to play chair for just a short bit as we wait for Representative Portis to join us. And as we look at the agenda this morning, we will be getting an update from the chair about working with the Speaker's office on various initiatives that are going on through the panel. But we're going to actually start with Damien going through Legislative Council through proposed changes to the House policy for the prevention of discrimination. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. For the record, Damien Leonard, Office of Legislative Counsel. So there's a handout in front of you here. So what I've done is I went through the policy and I worked with our HR director, Arlene Donovan, to kind of look at it with a fresh set of eyes and take her experience in the HR world and see where we could improve. So the first and biggest suggestion was that we take the policy and we split it into a policy and then rules of procedure. And the reason for this is that if you can imagine you're just a regular person and you're trying to figure out what your rights are and you pick up this 14-page document, it can be a little intimidating, especially after you get through the first couple of pages and then you get into the procedure and you're like, but wait. So the first thing I have to do is, no, wait, that's the first thing that, and so you can get really lost in those procedures instead of focusing on what are my rights. And so that was her first suggestion is let's break it out into a policy that just covers the things that a normal workplace's harassment or discrimination policy would cover, which are statements that discrimination and retaliation are unlawful and prohibited in the workplace, description and examples of what that means, identifying the range of consequences for staff and members if they engage in prohibited activity, describing at a really high level the process for filing an internal complaint, and importantly, something we're missing in our current policy is names and contact information for the members of the panel. So if you're not very familiar with our website, it might be hard for you to figure out who to contact now. So if you can keep that in the policy, that gives you a little bit more information. The other important piece is the panel is not the only option for someone to pursue an internal solution. So for example, for a staff person, they can go to their supervisor, they can go to the Office of Human Resources, or they could come to the panel. For a member, they could go to the panel. They might also speak with the Office of Human Resources, or maybe the Speaker's office, or even their committee chair, depending on where the behavior is occurring. Sometimes, for example, if it's inappropriate comments being made in the committee setting, the best solution is to talk to the chair, because the chair controls that setting and the chair can prevent the behavior from continuing so that it doesn't become a significant issue down the road. So it can just be stopped ahead of time. And so that would be a good way to kind of sort of narrow it down and give people an idea of who they can talk to so that they don't just think my options are this panel of legislators, which for some staff members can be really intimidating. Or I have to go to the Attorney General's office or the Human Rights Commission. And so this would be helpful in kind of laying that out. And then finally, summarizing at a high level what the federal and state enforcement agencies do, how to contact them. We do have that contact information in the policy already, but we don't have a great summary of what they do. And so that would also be helpful for folks.
May I comment on that?
Yeah.
Why not have the HR office director be the first person for everyone, so that the office itself could understand the scope of issues, and that persons could say, or small, you should go to your chair on that issue, or, the speaker would be a good person for you, representative, like, or whoever. But that there'd be, it's so dispersed, there's like 5 different ways, and if a chair is not effective in dealing with it, it may stop there and nothing may happen. Or if, and one of us, if we're not in session and it's someone who's working here, it's complicated. And so, and also if the HR office could then do an annual report saying there had been 3 complaints or there were 57, I don't, could be no complaints. I'm not saying that it's rampant, but it still seems awfully dispersed to me to know what to do.
So the idea with giving people options is that depending on the situation, people have different comfort levels approaching different people because they know them or don't know them. And so for the HR office, for a lot of our staff, they might have contact with Arlene once a year when they see her at a training. I see her once or twice a week. But that's one of the reasons to try to focus it, which actually brings me to my next point, though, is instead of having one policy for everyone, giving each office its own individual policy. So instead of, I think with the legislative members, I've drafted an example for the sexual harassment prevention panel that I can throw up on the screen in a minute, just so you can see the contact section there. But it's like the panel members, the speaker and the House clerk, and then Arlene are your 3 different contacts. So it's a little bit more truncated list. And then at trainings, we've mentioned things like your chair would be another person you could talk to. Because from one standpoint, when you're in your committee room, they're the supervisor. But it's very different. For example, say someone in drafting operations, they may know who Arlene is, but they may not ever see her or have any relationship, so they may not be comfortable going to her with a complaint. Whereas they might be comfortable.
Problem that
So-
none of us know who our HR director is.
Well, it's a new position for the,
Not that.
But I think the key here is in any real office, your supervisor and your HR person are both people you can report to.
Yes.
So saying to people you have to report to HR limits their options. And you're potentially running into, well, I couldn't find Arlene, or Arlene was swamped with work, or she wasn't able to reply to my email, or whatever it is. And then versus or I didn't feel comfortable going to her, and so I let it continue until it got really bad.
Okay.
So I would argue on the side of keeping options for people, but also focusing it on each individual office. The other piece too is Arlene doesn't have jurisdiction over members. So she helps with HR issues related to members, but ultimately you judge the qualifications of other members. So all she would be doing is funneling complaints to this panel, which just adds another step in the process. So versus having complaints being able to be made to any member of the panel. So for another member of the House, if they're comfortable talking to you, they may come to you first.
Yeah.
And part of the way the process works too is it allows for that informal contact first, so that
I understand.
so that one of you can sit down and say, well, it sounds like, maybe in a good, well, not a good scenario, but in a more legal scenario, it's, you could say, well, this sounds like it's not really discrimination, but it does sound like personality conflict, and so maybe we can help alleviate that. And then in another scenario, you could say, oh, this sounds like that's actually sexual harassment. Let me help you to that panel. or this sounds like it's an ethical issue, or this sounds like it's discrimination. And so you can then, if it is discrimination, you can say, so, we could do an informal resolution where some of us work with that member to try to get a resolution, or we could pursue a formal complaint, or something that I've done as a facilitator is coaching people through having that conversation with the person to basically say, hey, what you're doing is unwelcome conduct and I'd like you to stop. And oftentimes, my experience with those conversations is the person who was making the unwelcome comments or doing the unwelcome behavior wasn't really thinking about their impact on other people, and that conversation will help. So I don't mean to push back too hard, and I see the advantage of having sort of a centralized complaint because we are so dispersed and siloed here at the legislature. But there's also just concerns about that have been raised in the past about, well, if I just have to go to the panel, or if I just have to go to this one person, what if that person is a friend of the person who's perpetrating it? Or what if I don't feel comfortable talking to them about it? And so the idea is to try to give people as many options as possible that then funnel into.
Well, maybe the HR director should meet with these two panels.
That
we have kind of a loop of communication.
That's actually that's number 3 on here. It's a major thing I think this policy is updating with respect to utilizing HR as a resource. So working in consultation with HR, directing staff offices, so supervisors, whenever they receive a complaint, to work in consultation with HR, because HR understands the law and they understand the process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I did.
That's okay. That's okay.
I totally agree.
It's early, the lights are down in this room. And these conversations are important because this is how we can sort of understand the shortcomings in the policy. So anyway, the bottom line with the shorter policy is it's more digestible and user-friendly, because right now, the first response I got from Arlene when I was talking was, wow, this is really long. And it's really hard for me to read from one end to the other and keep a clear idea of what's, what my options are. So the other piece too, and this is an administrative piece for this panel, is if we separate out the procedural rules, it means that we can update a rule or we can update the policy without having to open up the whole document. So from a drafting standpoint, I think we've talked a little bit in some of our past meetings about, hey, this rule here isn't really clear about, how we're supposed to communicate after we get a complaint or something like that. So what I've done with the proposal that I've put together for the sexual harassment prevention panel is to take our current policy, which kind of reads in a narrative form, and break it out into more of a statutory form where it's Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 3. So we could just have a proposal to amend Rule 3 or something like that. So it'd be more like the legislative work that we do. And then the policy itself could be more of a sort of living document that is focused more on the goals that we have for the legislative work environment, rather than the nitty-gritty procedures of how do you process a complaint when it comes in. So yeah, getting to legislative human resources, HR is a resource that we really need to incorporate, one for individuals who want to report discrimination. Supervisors, really huge benefit from having HR involved if you get a complaint, because they, what Arlene and Eliza are really good at is understanding sort of the big picture of what are our obligations, when should we, get counsel involved, etc. so that we address the issue effectively and quickly. And then 3, for the panel, right now the policy has no mention of the panel working with HR. And I would encourage you to have HR involved from the time any formal complaint comes in, and possibly just a general, language in there that provides for consultation with HR. The panel may consult with HR regarding, anything that it thinks is necessary for their input on. Because Arlene and Eliza are a huge resource.
Great, yeah, no, this is great, this is the loop.
Yep. And then the last piece here, number 4, actually, that is a leftover from when I prepared a similar piece for the sexual harassment policy. You already addressed that. So
look at us go.
yeah, well done. Well done. So legislative IT and operations are in this policy. Legislative HR needs to be added. So that's the only new office that needs to be added. But that in brief is the need to sort of update the policy. Overall, the policy is, the information it has on discrimination, the prohibitions and so forth, is really good. So, but it's gets a bit opaque and cloudy when you get to the procedures. So whatever we can do to sort of break that out of the regular policy and leave that there for individuals who are have actually filed a complaint, would be helpful.
Thank you so much for this work, Damian. I think it really lends to the conversations we've been having in this panel around accessibility. And so I feel it myself when reading through the policy that we have in place. It is very long. You can get lost in all of the words. So any way that we can make it clear for folks to know what their avenues are and what discrimination is constituted as would be helpful to this body. I'll also recognize that Chair Cordes has joined us online. Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
Just listening in. I am driving, but hands-free.
Okay. Drive safely, please.
Yes, please drive safely. And Damian, did you say that you wanted to share what the sexual harassment?
Sure, I can share what that looks like from them. Am I co-host Mike? Oh, I'm not even in the.
Let me, I can get it up. Which,
Thanks.
Well,
tell me which one you put.
I wonder, Damien, I know you're double booked as well.
Yeah.
So,
You can go to the policy V2.
This one?
Yep.
For today.
Yeah, so this will give you a sense of what I've done for them. And so,
Oh, hang on, I gotta share it, sorry.
oh,
Different,
There we go.
different setup, there we go.
all right. So this gives you a sense of what I've done for them. And we can pull up the rules in a second. I would just note that this is far more time consuming than I thought it was going to be. So if we're going to do it, 2 weeks lead time would be really appreciated, just so I have time to get it done on top of the regular work. But the other thing to remember here too is you're going to see some strike through and some underlining. The stuff that's in yellow is stuff that I've changed. The stuff that's not highlighted is where they left off before COVID, when they were in the process of updating the policy. And then the Senate panel, who they work in concert with, decided to pause while we waited to hire an HR director, so that they wouldn't have to go back through the process again after hiring the HR director. So if we could scroll down to about page 3 to 4.
and the HR director has had input with you on this?
Yes, she's working with me on it. She has been tied up with the compensation study. One more page down, Mike, please. So here's the contact information. So it takes up a lot of space, but it's very clear sort of who's on the panel, and then House supervisors here. So this is imagining this is for staff of the House and members in the House. And then legislative human resources. So it's got your sort of, in this case, 9 contact people. In a staff office, it would probably be, so like, if this was for legislative council, it would be legislative council supervisors, and it would probably be Jen Carby and Mike O'Grady, our chief counsel and deputy chief. And then Caitlin Eustick, our director of drafting operations, which is part of legislative council. And then we'd have the leg human resources contacts below that. So in each case, there will be a supervisor and then the panel that you can contact. With the staff offices, we would also be different in that we would be citing to the joint panel, which has jurisdiction over the nonpartisan staff offices, versus the House or the Senate, where you're under the chamber panel. So, but that gives you sort of a sense. I think that there will be less changes for we can take this down and put up the rules of procedure, Mike. There will be less changes for the discrimination prevention panel because you've already made the changes that the House had proposed, or the House sexual harassment panel had proposed before the pandemic. But the big change here is going through the actual rules of procedure where I've broken it out like this. So it reads more like legislation, definition section, and then informal contact. And then you can see here, the 4th line from the bottom, I cite to rules 5 through 17. That's how I've broken out the formal process, so that each step along the way has a rule sort of describing what goes on. But yeah, so that it basically breaks your 12-page policy now into a 6-page policy and then an 8-page rules of procedure, give or take. And that's probably all we need to go through. Are there questions on that? And I will hold off on doing that until I get a green light from the panel. But if that's something the panel's interested in, I would be happy to do that.
Madam Chair, can you check in with Damien now on this? Any thoughts?
Yeah, my plan is to watch the YouTube video and then follow up, and just so you know, I'm stopped now, I'm not driving. So I'll watch the YouTube video, follow up with Damien, and committee members, and we'll do it as quickly as possible.
All right, sounds good. Oh, and just on a related update, we talked a little bit about, as you probably remember yesterday, the sexual harassment panel had an amendment for remote meeting authority during the interim. We were going to look at a similar amendment today. We've been asked to put that on hold. The Rules Committee is considering possible changes to the ethics and sexual harassment prevention panel's remote meeting authority. And so as we figure out exactly how to word that so that everyone's happy, we've just been asked to hold off on doing the resolution proposing the authority here, so that we don't have to then follow it up with a second resolution to make further amendments. So just for anyone who's wondering why we aren't doing that today.
It's so Damien, if it would take, you think, at least 2 weeks to kind of, with your workload, if we did this?
Yeah, it's really dependent on the workload. This week I was lucky in that my week was, it's been like a day of like stacked work, and then a day where I have very little committee time, and then another day where I'm booked door, start to finish, and then another day with very little committee time. So I had 2 days where I could really work on it. If I'm in a normal week, it's a lot more broken up, and just the work is not that hard, but it's just very time consuming to get everything to fit together and move the pieces.
I'm just trying to think of the possible timing if 6 weeks left in the session or so.
So if we meet every other week.
Yeah.
Theoretically, at the next meeting, I could present changes to you, and then we could do the walkthrough and then do markup. And hopefully vote it before the end of the session.
Great.
But yeah, the other challenge is that I'm doing the same thing for the sexual harassment prevention panel. My colleague Jen Carvey is covering for me over there right now, walking through the documents I just showed you. So yeah, that's the challenge. And they're also trying to get it through both the House and the Senate in 6 weeks. So, and I really hope 6 weeks is accurate.
Because it might be nice if we go ahead, if we present them in tandem.
Yes.
Probably clearer for the legislators to say, okay, here are the two different issues
Mhm.
instead of a week apart or something.
Yeah.
House of the floor.
Yep. All right.
It sounds good. We'll work with you. We'll work with you, Damien.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I will see you guys well shortly in your various committees. So thank you for your time.
Sounds
this
good.
morning.
And thank you, Damien. And the other business of the committee is not urgent, so we can, and it's very brief. So we'll put that off for another time and we can just adjourn.
Wonderful.
Great.
Well, thank you for juggling all of these pieces, Damien. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Damien.